Welcome to our forum on extended producer responsibility and how legislation for packaging can help to reduce waste. My name is Julie Tai. I'm president of the New York League of Conservation Voters. One of our missions is to advocate for policies that fight climate change and reduce pollution. Waste is often an overlooked part of our economy, but it is the fourth largest contributor to climate change in the state. New Yorkers produce 4.5 pounds of waste per person per day. 6 million tons of waste per year is landfilled here, and we export another 6 million tons to other states. That's why reducing waste has been one of our priorities for decades. Much of our waste is generated from single-use products like cans, bottles, and bags. And since the pandemic began, we're seeing more and more packaging waste dotting our streets, including cardboard boxes and plastic space fillers. Exacerbating this, the recycling system has lately been undergoing a crisis of its own, as overseas markets are accepting our products less and less frequently. Municipalities are overburdened with processing our refuse and recycling, and some have even suspended recycling collection completely. It does not have to be this way. We can implement policies that discourage single-use products so we have less waste to process. We can also hold manufacturers accountable for the waste they produce and alleviate the financial burden on local governments and taxpayers. Extended producer responsibility for packaging, one of the initiatives included in our state policy agenda and a priority for the 2021 legislative session, can help us make meaningful progress. It will ease the recycling burden on municipalities while at the same time encouraging manufacturers to adopt more sustainable practices. To hear more, please welcome the legislation sponsor, our chair of our Environmental Conservation Committee in the State Senate, and today's first speaker, Todd Kaminsky.
Thank you so much, Julie, and I'm really happy to be here with this expert panel and for you shining light on this really important issue, but also kind of an esoteric one that few people have ever heard of, called EPR. And extended producer responsibility is something that's actually used throughout the world. Our neighbors to the north in Canada have various versions depending on the province. We've gotten into the weeds to try to figure out what they're doing. But what motivated me to do this? What motivated Assemblyman Engelbright, the assembly sponsor, and I to care about this? Well, what if you told people right now in some part of our state that item that you're putting in the recycling bin may not, and probably not, actually ever be recycled? What if they knew that material was actually going to a landfill and millions other like that? What if they knew that their local municipality was hemorrhaging money, taxpayer money every year on recycling? What if they knew that the machines that their municipalities used to sort and do the recycling were old and unable to produce a finished product that other countries might want to buy and did not have the latest technology? I think they would come to the conclusion that I came to, which is that our recycling system is in crisis and we need answers right away. And EPR, extended producer responsibility, is a holistic answer to that. And the way it would work would be the following. It would mean that those who produce paper and packaging would actually have to fund the cost or a significant amount of the cost of recycling. And depending on how eco-friendly or how much of the material they would make, those producers would pay more into the system or less, depending on those factors. And that money would be used to help fund municipalities to pay for their recycling, purchase new equipment, hit recycling goals, all of which could really uplift the system. It's the necessary funds that are going to propel everything forward. Now, if you are a company that wants to pay less, then you will make less packaging or make more eco-friendly packaging or both. And it really creates a circular economy. And the amount of recycling we're doing, the new technology we'll be producing, the servicing of it, everything will create an explosion of green jobs. So we are really excited about EPR. This expert panel, everyone from Andrew, Tom, Scott, Josh, Adrian, everybody are more expert than I am on the mechanics, although I had to learn to know them well about how we do this by creating professional responsibility organizations where these producers band together and help price this out. It's very interesting how it's going to happen, but this is coming. We want New York, just like we did with the CLCPA on climate, we want New York to be on the ground floor of this economy, to be the first state to enact this, to be the first mover, to be an example for the rest of the country. And I think when we look back on this a few years from now, it will be a no-brainer, and we'll be glad that we acted first. And I'm hoping that this session is when we'll take the first significant step by passing my legislation.
Thank you so much, Senator. We hope that too. We thank you for your leadership on this issue. We were going to be joined by the sponsor of the bill in the Assembly, Assemblyman Steve Engelbright. Unfortunately, he is unwell today, so he will not be able to join us. But we do have a panel of experts, as the Senator mentioned, to talk about EPR and how it can help our communities reduce and manage waste. So our first speaker is Scott Cassell. With 35 years in the public-private sector, Scott has been a key leader in the United States product stewardship movement for the past 20 years as CEO and founder of the Product Stewardship Institute. PSI's facilitation process for stakeholder engagement and consensus building helped lay the foundation for the passage of the nation's 100+ extended producer responsibility laws, including the 5 extended producer responsibility laws here in New York, such as e-waste. In 2019, PSI used its national model to facilitate the development of a packaging EPR framework for New York, which is now central to Senator Kaminsky's bill, with significant input from the New York Product Stewardship Council and other stakeholders. So Scott, to start us off, can you give us an overview of what EPR is?
I sure can. I do happen to have a few slides. If we can put those up, please. Just happen to have them handy. Here we go. Thank you very much. So let me start where Senator Kaminsky started and where Julie started. And I want to thank the League of Conservation Voters and you, Julie, for allowing me to speak today, and also to thank the Senator for sponsoring this important piece of legislation. Our current system is fragmented, and as you see here, the consumer over on the left is paying the producer for a product, and that includes its package. So they're paying once there, but they're also paying another time, as all of us are taxpayers or ratepayers. We're paying into the municipality, or we're also paying the haulers directly, some of us, in order to collect and recycle that material. So the bottom line is, in this current system, we are paying twice for the material, for that packaging, and we have very little control over what is put on the market by the producer. It's a fragmented, disconnected system. Next slide. Thank you. So under extended producer responsibility, the big change is that we as consumers and taxpayers will be paying once. The consumer pays the producer for that product and package, and then the producer will pay into a producer responsibility organization, a PRO. And as Senator Kaminsky mentioned, it's not going to be the same for every material. They're going to have incentive based upon differential fees. So if they make a material that's more reusable, more recyclable, has greater recycled content, has fewer toxics in it, no toxics as a matter of fact, they're going to be paying less on that fee than if it was the other way around, where they're going to have higher fees on the market. And then the P are going to use to hire the MRFs in order to collect the material. Next slide, please. Click it again, please. Whoops, I guess it's missing the part on the bottom. So anyway, extended producer responsibility as a definition extends the producer's responsibility upstream. That's the arrow to the left. It's going to product design. It's going into the mining of those materials. It goes into the manufacturing of the materials that go into the packaging, but it also extends past the consumer to the post-consumer stage in reuse, recycling, and safe disposal. So under these systems, the consumer and the municipalities have greater control. They're paying once for the system rather than twice. Next slide. In terms of the benefits, as I mentioned, there's huge benefits in terms of ratepayer and taxpayer burden reduction. We're harmonizing the recycling statewide. There's going to be, the educational systems will be harmonized. The type of materials that will be collected will be more uniform. This will create a network of accountability for all the stakeholders. So the producers are primarily responsible, but so are the haulers, the municipalities, the recyclers, state government, as well as the consumers. So it has a network of accountability for all the different stakeholders. I mentioned the promoting the design for the environment already and better products on the market. All this does is increases the marketability of those materials. So as Senator Kaminsky mentioned, that these are going into the right place at the end. They're not going into the landfill and the waste to energy plants. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Julie, for perhaps another question.
Great. So what is the landscape of EPR adoption at the national level? And have other states adopted an EPR? I get the impression from Senator Kaminsky, the answer to that is no.
No, and I do have those slides again. So if we could have those put up, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Josh. So in the United States, while there are no packaging EPR laws currently right now, and we've been working on this issue for 15 years and other issues for 20, there are 119 EPR laws passed in 14 products in 33 states. You can see the map here. New York has 5. There's also some local laws, so it has this streaking to it. It's Northeast, the West Coast, and the Great Lakes area are the areas which have the most bills that have been passed. But as I mentioned, none for packaging yet, but we expect that to change. Next slide, please. In New York, and I know Andrew's going to talk about this later, but you have 5 EPR laws: paint, batteries, thermostats, electronics, and pharmaceuticals. But there are many other EPR laws that have been passed around the country. You have a mattress bill that's also in the hopper right now for this year. So New York has a lot of great experience already on managing EPR laws, so you're well prepared for packaging. Next slide, please. So we are working not only in New York, but about a dozen other states around the country. They have introduced already or will soon be introducing packaging bills for packaging and paper product EPR bills. You can see those here pretty much matches the EPR laws from around the country. We've also worked with the federal bill for the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act. The EPR central component of that. Next slide. And just to show you where things are at right now worldwide, packaging EPR is spreading. It's gone from just in Europe, where it started in 2000, all the way across Europe into Canada, to China, to Asia, and to South America and other countries as well. So we are poised to finally have our first EPR law in the United States, even in Iceland and in Israel as well, let me say. Back to you, Julie.
Great. So there's a lot of activity going on there. What can you talk about where the EPR model has been successful?
Yeah, sure. So there's certainly been these countries here have great experience. All across Europe, EPR has been in play for over 35 years. It's been over 15 years in Canada and many other places as well. In terms of British Columbia, to the north of us, they have the greatest experience here in North America. And British Columbia has gotten rates of 90% recycling, and their program is less than 5 years old. We also have Belgium in Europe is a really good example. They're at 92% recycling. Here in the United States, on average, we're about 50%. So there's a great deal of experience. We work internationally as well, and for that reason, we bring that experience as much as we can here into the United States. Next slide. I just wanted to end here and just to remind you, you have a great experience on EPR, and you're poised to get these benefits on the paint program. You have other benefits from all the other EPR laws, but it's huge here in terms of the paint program. And I'm just using this as an example, as a launching pad for packaging. So there's millions of gallons collected, millions of dollars. This is nationwide, hundreds of millions of dollars saved. There's convenience through the collection sites. There's jobs created. There's greenhouse gas emissions that are reduced. And we're talking packaging, which is probably on the magnitude of like 10 times more than on paint or any other product right now. So there's huge savings, huge benefits for New York. And we're all really poised and so glad that Senator Kaminsky is here with us to talk about this bill.
Gotta love a policy that can not only help us manage a problem, but can also save us money. Seems like a winner to me. Great, thank you for that, Scott. That's a good starting point for us. Our next speaker is my colleague, Adrienne Esposito, who is co-founder and executive director of the Citizens Campaign for the Environment. She has worked on numerous environmental campaigns for over 35 years, including upgrading wastewater and drinking water treatment systems, protecting drinking and surface water, remediation of toxic plumes, stewardship of land and water, support for large-scale renewable energy projects, reduced pesticide applications. Adrienne has worked on pretty much everything, I feel like, and she has served on numerous boards and advisory committees on the local, state, and federal level, and is widely considered an expert on environmental protection issues. So Adrienne, how can EPR help reduce the burden on landfills?
Well, good morning, everybody. And I want to reiterate, what Scott said. Congratulations to LCV for holding this forum. And we're delighted that Senator Kaminsky and Assemblyman Engelbright are championing this bill. So for us, I think the issue is, what are we going to do with our garbage? And as Julie said earlier, we have a recycling crisis, but it's even more than that. We actually have a solid waste management crisis. We all get very used to throwing our garbage at the curb and then it goes away. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, when we throw something away, where is away? And we want to give you a little illustration of the answer to that. And the answer is, it depends on where you live. So I want to just use Long Island here as an example of why EPR is not something that's a luxury item. It's a necessity. On Long Island, for instance, where 3 million people live and produce lots of solid waste materials, you can see, I don't know if this chart is clear enough, but don't worry, I have it memorized. If you live in the town of Hempstead or the town of North Hempstead or Babylon or Smithtown or Huntington or Islip, all the waste goes to waste to energy facilities or incineration, and then it goes to a landfill in the middle of Brookhaven town. Well, that's the vast majority of Long Island's waste. The landfill is closing in 2024, which is a very quick date. Babylon town is kind of self-sufficient. They have a waste to energy plant and they dispose of that at their own ash fill. The ash fill is closing in 2027. So, and then you can see the other remainder towns truck everything off Long Island to landfills upstate and landfills in Pennsylvania, and those landfills are also filling up. So what are we doing? What's the plan? We don't have one. And there lies the solid waste management crisis. In the Brookhaven landfill alone, it takes in, as this chart says, 350,000 tons of ash annually. Where is it going to go? We don't know. It also takes in, this doesn't say it, but 720,000 tons a year of construction and demolition debris. Where is it going to go? We don't know. So we have a pending crisis where if everything gets trucked, it's going to be excessively expensive, and that's not a good environmental solution. The one part of the solution to managing solid waste is to reduce it. Everyone agrees. That is the cheapest thing we can do. It's best for the environment, it's best for the public, and it surely is best for the municipalities that are now saddled with finding the answers and raising taxes to implement those new answers. So reducing our waste will produce less need for these landfills, less need for an ash fill, and it's the one thing everybody agrees upon. And just as Julie just said, an answer that saves us money and saves the environment is the right answer. It is illogical, and I'm sure that Andy will talk about this, for the financial burden of solid waste management to be shouldered only by the public and the municipalities. Producers, just like we did in the bottle bill, need to share that burden and come up with the answers and help us with managing their waste stream. And we need to get this bill done this year. So thank you again, and we look forward to answering questions.
Well, are there other environmental benefits from this? I mean, obviously, we talked about reducing the amount of waste that we're generating in the first place. Are there other environmental benefits that you want to highlight?
There are a multitude. I only had 7 minutes, but there are a multitude of environmental benefits to highlight. You know, the reduction of truck traffic, the reduction of the need for landfills, which frankly do have odors, the reduction of burdens on the community, the reduction of greenhouse gases, and the more recyclable materials are. And this will incentivize the companies to reduce their waste and increase their recyclability. So honestly, the environmental and public health benefits are numerous. The economic benefits are also quite valuable. And this actually is great because it doesn't just depend on public actions to recycle. Now we've brought in the businesses to help.
Excellent point. I think we'd also probably use less natural resources in the first place, which is terrific. Our next speaker is Andrew Radin. Andrew is Director of Recycling and Waste Reduction for the Onondaga County Resource Recovery Agency, affectionately known as OCRA, and has 30 years of experience in the recycling and solid waste field. He serves as chair of the New York Product Stewardship Council and plays a leadership role on the legislative committee of the New York State Association of Reduction, Reuse, and Recycling. So Andrew, we've heard a lot about the benefits and how the program would work, but you actually run a facility in New York representing a big county. What is the landscape of EPR in New York, and how would EPR help to reduce the burden on municipal collection programs? And for those of you who don't know, Onondaga County has one of the best recycling programs in the state.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks to the Senator, the Assemblyman for their leadership on the issue. Thanks to the League for supporting the webinar this morning. And thanks to all of you folks for being interested in this, and hopefully for your support for this. New York State is already through the EPR looking glass. EPR is well underway in New York State. We've got existing programs, as Scott kind of briefly mentioned, for mercury thermostats, for rechargeable batteries, and for electronic waste. In fact, just to highlight the electronics impact, since that law went into effect in 2011, statewide, we've collected over 600 million pounds of e-waste for recycling, reuse, which otherwise would have gone for disposal. In fact, New York City alone reports that they've seen a 60% reduction in the amount of e-waste in their trash as a result of the EPR bill for e-waste that was passed over 10 years ago. And we've got a couple of new things coming down the pike too. Thanks to the leadership in the legislature. We're going to have paint stewardship within the next 12 months or so. We project that that's going to result in the recovery and recycling of over 3 million gallons of paint every year, and also under development in the wake of a law that was passed and signed. We're going to have pharmaceutical take back EPR very soon too. So the next slide, please. So now the question is, how do we take this EPR leadership and apply it to the cornerstone of recycling in our state, which is curbside recycling? And maybe many of us have already read the story in the New York Times that came out at the end of January, which kind of highlighted the challenges across New York State and really underscored that we're at a crossroads for recycling in New York right now. So the question is, are we going to remain stuck at the crossroads, or are we in New York going to lead the nation in creating the circular economy of the future? And together, working together, we're going to achieve that this year. Next slide, please. So what's happening in terms of the recycling challenge? What's going on? We have severely depressed commodity markets. This is in the wake of China's national sword and no longer taking half of the world's recyclables. We're suffering from low material recovery rates, about half the recovery rate compared to other geographic areas, including in Canada, that already have EPR. Residents are confused about what's recyclable. Why wouldn't they be confused? Almost every plastic container has got a recycling symbol on the bottom, whether it's recyclable or not. So folks really are confused on what should be recycled. And it has already been mentioned, as well in the session, technology for the recycling at the material recovery facilities at the MRFs is outdated, and that's the case whether it's a public sector facility or even the private sector facilities, and they're concerned about making the investment and updating technology with concerns about the return on investment in the wake of depressed commodity markets and the challenges of a constantly evolving recycling stream. So in a nutshell, these are really the existing challenges to recycling as we see them at the moment. Next slide, please. So what's the situation currently in New York State, folks? Well, the good news is, hey, every year we are recovering curbside over 1.5 million tons of materials for recycling. That's great, but because of the depressed commodity values, in 2021, we're projecting that it's costing municipalities over $80 million to sort and process those materials at the material recovery facilities. This does not include our cost for collection. It does not include our current investments in public education. And there's also 860,000 tons plus of recyclables trashed every year in New York State. Let me just drill down into that real quick. That includes an estimated 370,000 tons of newspapers, magazines, and mixed papers, such as junk mail. It includes over 200,000 tons of corrugated cardboard. It includes over 115,000 tons of recyclable plastic containers, almost 90,000 tons of glass, which is mostly wine and liquor bottles and other non-alcoholic glass beverage containers, and over 80,000 tons of metal cans. 860,000 tons trashed every single year. And municipalities were really facing inadequate financial resources to provide the level of public education that's needed to increase the recycling and the recovery rate and to improve the quality of the incoming stream, make sure that there's a minimal amount of contamination, and also, as I mentioned, to modernize the recycling technology in the state. Next slide, please. So our focus, we got a twofold policy goal. It's really to develop the recycling system of the future, to modernize the state's material recovery system. And the senator's bill is going to achieve that. And we also want to realign the costs for recycling with those that are benefiting. And I think Scott had already spoken to this issue too, about the consumers and the brand owners benefiting from the sale of their product. And that's where the costs should be best placed. So the new path for recycling New York State includes increased material recovery rates because of constant high profile and high quality public education that the bill requires that the brand owners invest in. It includes the creation of green sector jobs with the recovery or the potential recovery of those 860,000 tons of material. We're estimating the potential for an additional at least 1,000 green sector jobs in the state, and improved infrastructure investment at the material recovery facilities that would be required of the brand owners in the bill. And we're going to see less packaging waste. As Scott mentioned, the eco-modulation fees would incentivize the brand owners to reduce their packaging and to make it easier to recycle. We see less greenhouse gas generation with increased recycling and reduced waste to the potential of a 1 million to 2 million metric ton per year reduction in CO2 emissions. And that the municipal cost reduction as well, as I mentioned, over $80 million statewide projected this year alone. So this is our focus to improve the state's recycling system for the future and create in New York State the circular economy of the future in New York State. And we're looking forward to being part of the effort to achieve that in 2021. Julie, thank you.
Great, thank you. That's a lot of money we're talking about for municipalities in particular at a time when the local governments are really struggling as a result of the pandemic and the economic fallout. Our last speaker is Tom Outerbridge. Tom was born and raised in New York City and has worked in the field of recycling and composting since the 1980s. For the past 18 years, he has been general manager for SIMS, which is processing and marketing all curbside recyclables collected by the New York City Department of Sanitation. He also sits on the New York Product Stewardship Council. So Tom, Can you give us some specific examples of how EPR could allow businesses such as Sims to help municipalities improve their recycling rates?
Yes, good morning, Julie. Thank you, and thanks to the senator and your colleagues and your staff for advancing this. I think you do know, but just in case you don't, I just want to emphasize how significant this is. The previous, we've discussed EPR bills on paint and electronics and so forth, but I want you to realize this will address 40+% of the residential waste stream. It is absolutely massive for our industry and for the recycling sector. And I try to describe it to people as probably the most significant development in the world of residential recycling since the advent of curbside recycling, when I first started working in this field in the 80s. So it's tremendous. And the other thing is a general observation I would just first say, Julie, is to just realize these laws are not static, right? Quebec had their first law in 2005. I think they're revamping that now. In France, they're retooling their fee structure. And the reason for that is that the waste stream is not static, right? We now have flexible packaging, which we never had. We now use optical sorters for sorting plastics, which we never did. We're now introducing robots so that the landscape for that the recycling system needs to operate is going to evolve inevitably. And the law, we can try and sort of anticipate as much as possible. But I think the key thing that you're doing with this is setting out the framework to ensure producers understand the impacts of their products on the waste stream, and those responsible for managing it have the resources to adapt to that. So it's sort of a general encouragement, if you will. If you want to take a specific product, glass is a good example. Basically, glass is a very low value material with high processing costs. And so as a result, much of the glass that goes through curbside recycling programs in New York State ends up, unfortunately, as daily cover at landfills. It can, there's a lot of embedded energy in glass. It can go back to very high value uses, but the economics are not justified purely based on the commodity value. So an EPR program can support that, whether it be in the realm of capital investment or ongoing processing fees to direct that glass back into a high end use. And actually in New York State, New York has company, Urban Mining up in Kingston were the first ones, or among the first people to actually convert glass into a cement substitute, a positlan. And for you want to talk about climate change impacts or climate change carbon impacts, cement is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. You can now substitute a good portion of Portland cement with finely ground glass. And so you're solving actually multiple problems in that case. There's other materials that we could talk about. Polyprop. I mean, there's segments of the plastic stream that for which there are markets, but as Andrew mentioned, the current economics don't support installing the technology to sort these. Polypropylene is one of them. There's actually quite robust markets for that, but basically the volume of it and the cost of sorting it isn't justified. There's some grant programs out there being run by industry, but the idea of the EPR is you put in a sort of a more systematic approach to address these materials. Paper, mixed paper, the paper markets collapsed 2 years ago, which is kind of what led to a lot of this crisis, the closure of the Chinese markets. It doesn't mean there aren't markets for paper, but the pure simple economics of collecting and processing it we're forcing private processors basically to charge municipalities for something they had historically paid them for. And that's, so again, that's more of a straightforward sort of economic support, and some are much more on the sort of development and technology and innovation side.
So thinking about it a little bit differently, can you explain how EPR is helping the businesses who are producing materials to think more about their waste stream in terms of a circular economy? Because you've been talking about this more from sort of the back end of the recycling side.
Yes, so that's sort of this concept of eco-modulation fees, and there's France is a good example. I was just reading their fee structure. They're saying to businesses, if you package your product in a black plastic, which is not recoverable with current MRF technology, you're going to pay more than if you package it in a light colored plastic. Or if you have I have some of my favorite things are people put metallic labels on sprayed onto glass bottles, which is totally incompatible with converting that glass back into a glass bottle. And there's a fee structure. So you're basically, one, you're providing information back to the brands, and they have a lot of that information today, but you're overlaying that with actually a financial incentive, a fee structure to add, if you will, to their incentive to design for recycling.
Okay, thank you for that. We have questions from the audience now, so we can sort through who will take these various questions. I think all of our panelists can come back onto screen. But the first question we have is asking, can you talk about how EPR affects different people along the waste management chain? Consumers, sanitation workers, recycling plants, etc. So I don't know who is best served to answer that. I don't know if Andrew or Scott wants to take the first stab.
I'm going to punt to Scott.
All right.
Wow. So there are definitely roles and then definitely benefits for each of the parts of the stream. So for consumers, right now you're paying twice, as I mentioned, because all of us as consumers are also taxpayers or ratepayers. So overall in the system, there should be reduced costs for that system. But you're also, as Tom was mentioning, some really good examples here, you're going to have better choices. You're not going to cringe when you like the product but hate the package. So over time, we're going to see that the packaging is going to be much better, greener, if you will, and hopefully more in line with the products we're buying. Even the natural products are ones still that are coming in packages like flexibles. All my granola goes in flexibles. 4% are being recycled. So that's one end. I think I could go through each of the systems here, but the bottom line is there's going to be control over the whole system. So as a recycler, Tom's not going to wonder, why am I getting these materials? Or the municipalities are not going to have to say, wow, I can't do anything about this. My costs are going up. Costs are going to be controlled for the municipalities. They're not going to be relied on to pay for it. They won't have to dig into their budgets and watch the fluctuations of those markets anymore. There's total uncertainty. And then for the producers themselves, they're going to realize that they're going to have control over getting back these materials so that they can put them back into their products. They're making many claims and pledges to use recycled content, no landfilling, very, very high goals. They need control over the system in order to make that happen. So over time, yes, they're going to pay, but they're going to have great benefits in the back end over control over the materials to bring back into their new products.
Let me ask the question a slightly different way, and I'm wondering if this is what the question was trying to get at. So I'm a Jane consumer. I live in New York City. Is this going to change what I have to do with my recycling?
I'll take a stab at that. No, what it should do is hopefully make the sort of it easier. You won't have to, take Andrew's look at the bottom of the bottle and try and see if it's a number 7 or a number 6 or number 4. You're trying to reduce the discretion on the part of the consumer to try and identify which package is recyclable. But
I'm still going to put it in the same bin, basically. That's
yes.
I think.
Yes.
I'm the consumer. I'm a homeowner. I'm putting in the same bin. I'm not, unlike e-waste where I made you change, literally made you change where you bring those materials, right? This is different, right? This is still going through the same curbside collection program, right? Is what
I jump in on that?
Senator?
So the way I also like to think about it is, so right now in my community of Long Beach, we could only do cardboard and paper one week and do glass and plastic the alternative week, and it rotates. That is, a new advent because of the crisis we're in. That should, we shouldn't have to sort that stuff in the same way and leave it for, every other week. But also, we're all familiar with, you get that Amazon package, you open it. In the big box is a smaller box. In the smaller box is another box that may have like a tube of toothpaste, and don't judge me. But it's, we would like to think that after this, there'll be far less packaging, and when you look at holiday time and what's out on people's front stoop, it won't be that heaps and heaps of packaging because the producers created less.
And Julie, I want to jump in on this too. I think part of it is, let's be honest, how many consumers are turning the plastic around to see what number it is? Number one. And number two, okay, Julie, that would be you, but yes. But number two is different towns take different numbers.
Yeah.
So where I live, they only take plastics 1 and 2.
Right.
So fortunately for me, Chobani yogurt is in that category. However, there are other ones I like, which are not in that category, which now I don't buy because I can't recycle it. So, there are a multitude. I think it'll make it much easier for the public and much easier for the municipalities, because for them to enforce only throw out 1 and 2 plastics, I think is horrific, and it's not working. Let's be honest.
Yep. Okay, great. Thanks, everybody. How can we ensure that we're prioritizing reducing the amount of waste we're generating in the first place as the preferred option before we get to recycling? How does EPR help us with that?
I could jump in if no one's going to do that. So in these eco-modulated fees, or these differential fees, let's say, it's done by weight, first of all, of the material. So by material, it could be the type of plastic or the type of paper, metal, glass. It's also by weight. So if you're a company that makes a package with double the weight right now and you reduce that, you're paying less automatically. So it gives an incentive to the producer to package with less material. And then we are setting this up so that the fees themselves can give incentive for reuse and ultimately for the recycling of that material. So source reduction and reuse is definitely the top of the list. And these systems are refined so that they can get to that. But as Tom's mentioning, we need to recognize that these systems will be refined over time. It's not that we go, snap the fingers and get to 100% from the beginning. But reuse and source reduction has to be the top of the list.
Agreed. Of course, I would start with the fact that people in general also need to take some actions themselves. Things like, using reusable materials, water bottles and bags are things that I think of immediately that Joe consumer can do today. Are there estimates?
Julie, can I also say that EPR is not the end of the system? There's things like pay-as-you-throw programs that do go compatible with this, that is more of a consumer responsibility. So this is producer responsibility. There's consumer responsibility as well. If you pass one of the pay-as-you-throw programs where if you put out more garbage, you're going to pay more than to recycle and reduce your waste. So that's another incentive that we can add onto an EPR system.
Terrific. Are there estimates of how changes in packaging might cost or save consumers? We talked about this a little bit, like you just mentioned, the idea of generating less waste in the first place is obviously going to cost the producers less to do that. But what's the sort of the best response to producers who might oppose EPR or have concerns about it because of costs?
Well, I'll jump in first. I've been doing this work over 3 decades. And every time we work to make a change for the public, industry rolls into town and tells us how they can't do it. It's going to cost too much. I remember the bottle bill. I remember Coca-Cola and Pepsi lobbying, saying if we did a nickel return deposit on their products, that nobody will buy them and sales will plummet and it will cost too much. And none of that, in fact, their sales increased. None of that is true. So, we're in a new day. Producers have to share some responsibility. For decades, I've been hearing how they can't do things. And then once they are required to, it's a smooth transition. They figure it out and we all walk forward together. So I put a little less weight into the amount of complaining that they'll do before this gets enacted.
Okay. Does anyone else want to talk about costs or savings?
Well, I mean, certainly, Julie, there are probably certain packages that you may have to increase the cost of the material if it's going to be recyclable. But then there's a lot of packages where it's purely a marketing decision. Do you have to spray some metallic label on a cosmetic bottle? That's not a cost decision. It's a marketing decision that basically renders that bottle unusable in remaking glass. So I think there's going to be a spectrum.
Okay.
Julie, just to reiterate again, we're paying twice right now. So if we look at the costs for consumers and taxpayers and ratepayers, we're paying more with no control over that system. So as Tom has pointed out here, there are packages that should have a higher fee to them, and it's not fair for those 7th generation type of companies that are putting their products in much better packaging that has lower impact on the environment and lower cost for the recycling system. So there's an equity issue here as well. And one thing I also wanted to pick up on engagement of producers themselves. As Adrian just mentioned, the producers know this is coming. These systems have been in place for over 35 years in Europe. These are the same multinational companies that are selling products into New York and all over the United States. And as a matter of fact, it's only the last year that those companies have come to the table and been willing to engage. Same with the waste management industry. And the reason is because of the political will that has been exercised here. And this is where Senator Kaminsky and Assemblyman Engelbright are really we thank them so much because they're taking the public concern and really channeling it into political action. And that's the only thing that has gotten the producers to the table. Andrew, Tom, and I worked with the Flexible Packaging Association to actually mediate an agreement. They support EPR for packaging under certain conditions. They agreed on 8 key elements of EPR legislation. Now, we still have more discussions to go in New York with them and other brand owners, but they are coming around. The waste management industry realizes they need to be at the table. They need to be part of the solution. So we're at a very, very critical stage right now and a very exciting place to be.
Great. What are the benefits? And we touched on this a little bit during the discussion, but this is one of the questions we got is, what are the benefits of EPR for the climate? So Adrian, I know you talked about this a little bit, and some of the impacts, but do you want to touch on that a little bit more? I don't know if we've quantified like a GHG emission reduction, but.
I don't think we can quantify right now. We're still introducing the bill, a GHG reduction, but let's, the less plastics we use, the less oil we're using, the less waste we're transporting, the less fuel we're using, and it goes on and on. So, we have, I don't know if anybody has quantified the amount of greenhouse gas reduction that will occur, but we know some will occur. So it's the waste stream shouldn't be ignored in our battle to fight climate change. And this is one way to incorporate answers into our waste stream, which also incorporates answers into climate change. So again, can't be quantified, but we know it's there.
Yeah, I think, Julie, it's hard to Adrian's point. I mean, there's a million different scenarios, but I mean, the fee structure also rewards use of recycled content, right? Which is critical for market demand, and that in turn spurs, greater economic viability for recycling more materials. But the EPA does have, I think, standard per ton greenhouse gas savings from making glass out of recycled glass or aluminum out of recycled aluminum, and so one could model out what happens if you get an extra 100,000 tons of glass going back into glass bottles or aluminum. So it's a little bit theoretical at this point because you have to sort of make all sorts of assumptions, but there are relatively standard conversions for the greenhouse or energy savings, water savings, et cetera, from using recycled feedstock as opposed to virgin materials.
I'll take a whack at that because I have looked at those EPA conversion factors, and the EPA estimates that there's a 2.94 metric ton reduction of CO2 emissions for every ton recycled. So that's why I'm estimating that we've got the potential, based upon those 860,000 tons of curbside recyclables that are trashed every year, that are potentially recoverable and recyclable, looking at a 1 million to 2 million metric ton emission reduction to the extent that we recover as much of those 860,000 tons as possible. And I think that's going to be achieved thanks to the public education and outreach requirements that are in the senator's bill that are going to require the brand owners and the producers of the printed paper to make ongoing investments in high-profile, high-quality public education on an ongoing basis. That's, I think, going to be a key catalyst in recovering more material and the type of materials that belong in the recycling stream and not in the trash. So that's a rough estimate based upon the conversion factors that the US EPA offers.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead, Scott.
Julie, this is such an important point. I don't want to let it go by. EPR is a key climate change strategy that has not been put in place yet, but it should be, because the US EPA has done a report, a couple of years old already. It says that 29% of product manufacture across the life cycle contributes to the greenhouse gases. 29% of greenhouse gases is from product manufacture along the life cycle. And simply what this means is if we reduce or reuse or recycle, we don't need to mine those materials, remanufacture materials, and that takes energy. And right now we're using fossil fuels. So it's just a very simple connection that it's such a huge issue. EPR contributes to the reduction of greenhouse gases.
I'm going to ask a more brass tacks Albany question. What are the challenges we see in getting a bill passed? Right? We're all in favor, and we're grateful for the Senator and Assemblyman's leadership on this. But we all know if it were easy, this would already be the law. So what do we see as some of the challenges to getting a bill passed?
Well, right now, the newspaper industry is being extremely difficult at opposing it vehemently. They obviously have the power of the pen or ink or however you put it, so that's tough. We've offered them not to have to pay into the PRO, but to offer in-kind advertising space instead. They still don't want to do it. So they're doing outreach to different legislators. I see that as being an issue that we have to certainly deal with. I think if enough of the public knows about this should happen. I have the most co-sponsors on this bill than of any bill I've ever had, except for maybe the CLCPA, and this is in a much earlier phase than when that was done. So we just have to keep pushing. If the organizations represented here and those listening want to, continue to have the public push this, I'm very optimistic. I do not expect to leave this year's session without this done. So we just have to keep it a focus, keep the assembly focused, and keep moving.
Just to that point as well, I just want to mention that there's over 60,000 tons of newspapers and over 40,000 tons of magazines that municipalities recycle every year on behalf of the publishing industry. So it's an externalized cost that local municipalities have been bearing now for decades. And if we don't, I think, achieve something through the senator's vision, municipalities are going to be faced with continuing to bear that cost, and those costs are just not sustainable for us.
Yeah, I agree, and we're going to have to try to work on that. So, Julie, if you see Jim Walsh, we should or Adrian, we should continue to talk. But look, if the public wants this and senators and assembly members want this, this should happen. I'm very optimistic. That Time story was a very big catalyst. Programs like this are very helpful. We just got to keep the momentum going. And, we've been able to achieve harder things than this so far. So we just have to keep the focus on. Look, the problem with this bill, like a lot of other things, it's highly technical. It's definitely hard to explain in 30 seconds. And most people don't think about the recycling. Once, as Adrian says, you put it on your curb and walk away. So we just have to keep the bearing on. Now, there was a form email that went around, but it said Tom Kaminsky's bill. So whoever drafted that didn't read it very closely. But we have to keep the pressure on, keep moving. Earth Day is always a great target to be passing key legislation. If the governor's office is interested in doing this in the budget, they know my number. And we always have the end of session as well. So there are really 3 targets, and we should be pushing for all of them.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I want to thank Senator Kaminsky again for your leadership on this. Senator Engelbright, we look forward to working with him and you together to help get this done. Thank you to Andrew, Tom, Adrian, and Scott. Thank you all for attending today. We hope you learned a few things about waste management and product stewardship. In particular, every time you change a screen, it makes you move off of a full screen, moves away my talking points. If you tuned in late and you want to rewatch, we are posting this video on our YouTube page at youtube.com/NYLCV. Please follow us at NYLCV on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram for updates. If you're not already on our email list, of course, please sign up at www.nylcv.org. We thank you all. I assure you that Patrick from our office will be joining all of our colleagues here in helping to push this legislation as we move forward. So thank you very much and have a great weekend, everybody.